All right, welcome back to the Elias Macko Show. Now, it was 2 Fridays ago. I hadn't mentioned this on the show, but 2 Fridays ago, me and a couple of buddies, we finally got together. We've been talking about hanging out, I think, for around 3 months, right? So 2 Fridays ago, end up going to my pal's house. Another buddy comes over. We order in pizza. We all bring over snacks, and like it was total junk food, right? Like the Doritos and the chips and the Sour Patch Kids, all of that stuff. And we got together and we watched baseball together for 3 hours, 4 hours, and it was a great time. So that happens. I was really happy I finally got together with my friends. And then just in passing, I caught this piece in the New York Times Magazine, and the piece is entitled, "Where Have All My Deep Male Friendships Gone?" And the timing of me getting together with my buddies and this piece, it was just too perfect. So I said, let's talk to the author of this piece. Sam Graham-Felsen joins us now, author of this piece in the New York Times Magazine. Sam, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, you start off your story about where have all my deep male friendships gone. You start off with a story about one of your friends, a longtime friend, Rob. Why don't you start off with our listeners with your friendship with Rob and why you wrote this piece?
Yeah, so Rob and I met when we were in middle school. We had a mutual friend. I went to this mutual friend's sleepover party, and I was a pretty anxious kid. I was very scared of horror movies, and the last sleepover party I'd been to showed a terrifying horror movie, and I actually called my mom and had her pick me up and drive me home. It was quite embarrassing. And anyway, we were having pizza, had the birthday cake, and then they said, okay, it's movie time. Let's go pick a movie in the TV room. I started panicking, worrying that, they were going to pick a horror movie. I think I was 11 years old at the time. Not super young. So, I probably could have dealt with a horror movie, but I was an anxious kid. And anyway, this other kid at the party named Rob said, I don't really want to watch a movie. I'd rather go play video games in the other room. So I was like, thank God, someone else doesn't want to watch the movie. So I followed this other kid, Rob, into the other room, and I watched him play video games. And I don't know if he had done it for my sake, but I always had this feeling that, he knew that I was really nervous. He could tell, and he was kind of like giving me an out and letting me go with him. And it turned out that he was, a guy who was a really sensitive guy. He always, stuck up for the underdog. And we ended up becoming incredibly good friends and are still very good friends many years later. Although, as I write in my piece, my friendships to people like Rob, unfortunately, after I had kids and got married, my friendships really kind of fell off in terms of the regular contact. I rarely call my friends on the phone. I rarely see them in person anymore. And that's kind of what I was trying to explore in the article. And I will say, it's not because of the article, but, Rob and I used to take a bike trip every year together. And we are finally planning for, it's been about 10 years. We're finally planning to take another bike trip this summer.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Now, one of the things you get to in your piece is, the reasons why male friendships change over the years. And you mentioned, like, we have tons of friends. It's the hanging out and the phone calls that seem to subside over the years. So let's talk about that. How do male friendships change, and what do we need to do about it?
I looked into this because I wasn't really sure why, my male friendships fell off. So I wanted to explore it. So I talked to different historians and academics and, pollsters who have done work trying to analyze this question. And, one of the big things that I discovered is that, men men and women used to get married for very different reasons than we get married today. Nowadays, most of us, at least in places like America and Canada, we marry someone who we think of as our soulmate, somebody who is, maybe even our best friend, somebody that we really emotionally connect to. And once that happens, for a lot of people, of course, they're getting busier with their careers. And once they have children, they have even less time to hang out. But I think on some fundamental level, there's this feeling of like, your wife or your husband or your partner, they're your soulmate and they fulfill, the most important needs that you have. And your friends are kind of secondary, they're just not as important anymore. In the old days, though, it was not like this. In the old days, as early as, as recently as the, early 1900s, and for most of human history, people got married for very different reasons. They got married through arranged marriages. They got married, out of economic, convenience. They got married for more practical reasons, and their friends were actually, the people that they deeply connected with. So they stayed in much better touch with their friends. In fact, I got a chuckle out of this when I heard this from an historian. Men used to invite their friends, their best men, with them on their honeymoons. If you can imagine that,
Wow.
So it was very different back then. And I think, the standards changed, and, friendship, especially among men, I think women are much better at maintaining their friendships as they get older, but among men, particularly, straight men, there's this kind of idea that, you're not really supposed to be hanging out anymore. That's something young guys do. Older guys, it's not really, what's expected of older guys. It's something, that you do when you're in college and high school and maybe a little bit in your early 20s. But, once you hit your 30s and 40s, like, you should be working hard and, home with your family and, maybe play golf now and then with your friends, but that's about it. And, and I think that's unfortunate, because I think, I've been hearing from hundreds of men across the country, across the world, and, they've all been thanking me and saying, this article really, motivated me to reach out to my friends, because I've been totally out of touch with my friends.
We're with Sam Graham-Felsen, author of a New York Times piece recently published called "Where Have All My Deep Male Friendships Gone?" Sam, based on everything you looked into, all the people you talked to, and probably based on all the messages you've received since writing this piece, what can men do to rebuild and maintain deeper connections with their friends today?
The easiest thing men can do is take the first step. I talked to a couple guys who have a really fun podcast called Man of the Year, and it's a podcast that is exclusively dedicated to giving men advice on how to, rekindle their friendships. And the most important piece of advice those guys gave to me was, quote, "Be the friend," unquote. What they mean by that is, most guys have difficulty being the one to reach out and make the plan. And, that's for various reasons. I mean, I can speak for myself. I often have felt hesitant to reach out because I'm anticipating them saying, "Oh, I'm too busy. I don't have time," and I don't want to be the guy that, makes, puts some pressure on another guy to hang out. And, in reality, most guys do want to hang out. Most guys want to be asked to hang out and are happy to hang out. And, like you said, it could be as simple as watching a game. Rob and I, one of the, fundamental parts of our friendship was watching the Boston Celtics together. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you're probably going to do anyway at home by yourself if you have a favorite sports team, whether it's, the Expos or the Canadians or the Celtics, you're probably going to want to watch the game anyway. So, what's the harm in, reaching out to a friend and say, "Hey, you want to come over, bring a six-pack, watch the game with me?" And that can be the building block to, having deeper conversations about what's going on with your kids, what's going on in your marriages, what's going on, with your mental health. All of those things can kind of flow from that. I think guys have a much easier time relating when there's like a sports game on in the background, or when they're playing a sport together, when they're doing a kind of activity together. Women, it's much easier for them to just meet up and get coffee and, look into each other's eyes and talk about their deep emotions. I think guys struggle a little bit more with that. But I think the most important thing is just take that first step. Other guys want to hang out just as much as you do. They're just afraid to ask.
Sam, the Expos left 20 years ago, and you're breaking my heart this morning by breaking them up.
Oh my God, I can't believe I said that.
But that's another thing. It's okay. And so much of my friendships over the years were built on the Expos, by the way. So I think it really resonates actually as well. But can I ask you one thing to wrap up? You didn't mention in your piece and on air this morning, you haven't brought up technology. And I was a little surprised by that. Like, I think technology and the smartphone maybe is playing a role in ruining our friendships. And I wonder if you got a thought or two on that.
1,000,000%. It's playing a role in ruining our friendships. Rob and I are part of actually a larger group of guys that are friends from college and high school. It's 15 guys. We meet up once a year in person because we're scattered all across the country. Some of us are even in other countries now. And we used to exchange really long, deep emails with each other. And that has been completely replaced by quickly shooting each other, replies on WhatsApp or, responses on social media, which are designed to be quick, short, LOL. Let me send you a link to a funny YouTube video that I saw. It has completely eroded our ability to, to connect in this deeper way. And I think, it's also just, it's so easy to find yourself on a Thursday night, with no plans, your kids are asleep, you have an opportunity to go out, but you take out your phone, you start scrolling through Twitter or X or, TikTok, and then your night is over because you spent 3 hours doing that instead of connecting to a friend in person. So I think it has everything to do with social media. It's a huge factor. And, look, the good news is that more and more of us are waking up to the fact that, chatting with your friends or, even worse, chatting with strangers on social media is no replacement whatsoever for hanging out in person. Hanging out in person makes you feel good. I don't know about you, but I have never regretted hanging out with my friends. Every time I do it.
You're so right, Sam. I mean, yeah.
Every time I do it, I feel good when I come home and I say, hey, I got to do that more.
Sam, listen, you're a great talker. You're a great writer. I want to thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to load up an old Expos game on YouTube and invite my buddies over thanks to this interview. And thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Sam Graham-Felsen, for a New York Times Magazine piece is called Where Have All My Deep Male Friendships Gone? Do go seek it out and read it. A fascinating piece.